the moment that made it official. On Monday morning, the Cleveland Browns released a carefully worded statement. No urgency, no emotional language, just clarity. Kevin Stefanski was relieved of his duties as head coach after 6 seasons. Owners Jimmy and Dee Haslam expressed gratitude for his leadership, emphasized his character, and acknowledged the stability he brought to the organization, before concluding that results over the past 2 seasons did not meet expectations. Notably, the announcement did not reference a specific game or failure. Instead, it framed the move as a strategic shift. That wording matters because when organizations avoid pointing to a single cause, it usually means the decision was made long before the season ended. Why this decision feels different. From 2020 through 2023, Stefanski delivered something Cleveland rarely experiences: consistency. 2 playoff appearances. The franchise's highest 4-year winning percentage since the late 1980s. A culture built around structure and adaptability, even during seasons defined by injuries and quarterback instability. By Browns standards, this was progress. So when the team finished the 2025 season at 5-12 and last in the AFC North for the 2nd straight year, the record alone didn't explain the decision. The key detail is this: it wasn't about falling short once, it was about trending in the wrong direction. Over the past 2 seasons, Cleveland went 8-26, and that shift reframed everything that came before it. The quiet shift in expectations. 2 years earlier, Stefanski had won his 2nd Coach of the Year award, signed a contract extension, and was viewed as one of the league's more reliable offensive minds. But expectations evolve quickly in the NFL. Publicly, ownership maintained patience. Privately, based on available statements, the organization began reassessing whether its leadership structure could deliver sustained success. That reassessment didn't stop at the head coach. When the decision came, Stefanski was removed. Why Andrew Berry staying changes everything. Andrew Berry arrived in Cleveland at the same time as Stefanski in 2020, making their tenures closely linked. Ownership made its position clear. They believe the roster still has a young core worth building around, and that Berry is the right person to oversee the next phase. This wasn't a full reset. It was a leadership adjustment. When the strength became the question, Stefanski's reputation was built on offense. Scheme design, quarterback development, play sequencing. That was his calling card, which is why the Browns' offensive struggles over the last 2 seasons carried extra weight. During the 2025 season, Cleveland scored fewer than 20 points in 11 games. On its own, that number doesn't tell the full story, but in context, it signals something deeper. This was an offense expected to stabilize the franchise. Instead, it became the clearest sign that progress had stalled. The play-calling decision that spoke volumes. Midway through the season, following the Week 9 bye, Stefanski handed play-calling duties to offensive coordinator Tommy Rees. Publicly, the move was framed as collaborative. Internally, decisions like this often signal recognition that the current approach isn't producing results. This also wasn't the first time. For the 2nd consecutive year, Stefanski stepped away from calling plays. In the NFL, when a head coach gives up the responsibility most tied to his identity, it raises quiet questions, not about effort or intelligence, but about direction. A season defined by instability at quarterback. Any evaluation of Cleveland's offense must acknowledge quarterback instability. In 2025, the Browns used 3 starters. Joe Flacco opened the season before being benched and later traded. Rookie Dylan Gabriel started 6 games before suffering a concussion. That opened the door for Shedeur Sanders, who started the final 7 games. Each change reset timing and chemistry, magnifying every other issue on offense. The situation that hovered over everything. Even while not playing, one name remained central to the Browns' outlook: Deshaun Watson. According to publicly available information, Watson did not appear in the 2025 season after suffering a torn Achilles the year before. A second surgery followed. Although his practice window opened late in the year, the team chose not to activate him. League sources later indicated the Browns expect Watson to remain on the roster in 2026. That matters because his contract and availability continue to shape every major decision. Since joining Cleveland, Watson has played in a limited number of games due to injuries and suspension, and his on-field results have not matched the investment made in him. None of this falls on Stefanski alone. But when outcomes don't align with expectations, accountability in the NFL tends to move upward. What ownership was really saying, When Jimmy Haslam addressed the decision, one detail stood out. There was no breaking point, no single game, no defining loss. He described the move as a realization that it was simply time for a change. That language reframes the decision as philosophical rather than emotional. Haslam also emphasized that the Browns have no preference for the next head coach's background. What they're prioritizing instead is leadership, someone capable of managing expectations and long-term development. What comes next? This isn't a teardown. Andrew Berry remains. The young defensive core stays intact. Stefanski leaves behind a more stable organization than the one he inherited. That's not failure, it's transition. The Browns' next head coach will be the franchise's 11th since 1999, inheriting a roster with talent, constraints, and a fan base seeking continuity. Stefanski's firing isn't a story about collapse. It's about timing, expectations, and how quickly the NFL's definition of enough can change. The hidden weight of expectations. One of the least discussed aspects of Kevin Stefanski's tenure is when his success happened. His strongest seasons came early when expectations were still forming. In 2020, the Browns weren't expected to contend. In 2023, simply reaching the playoffs again felt like confirmation of progress. But once success arrives, it quietly resets the baseline. What once felt like overachievement becomes the minimum standard. By 2024 and 2025, Cleveland was no longer evaluated as a rebuilding team. The organization had already invested heavily, financially, strategically, and publicly in its core. When results plateau or decline at that stage, explanations begin to matter less than outcomes. Why context has a shelf life in the NFL. Throughout Stefanski's final 2 seasons, context was never absent. Injuries, quarterback turnover, roster imbalance, all of it was real, all of it was acknowledged. But in the NFL, context buys time, not immunity. Ownership didn't deny the challenges. They concluded that navigating them had reached a limit. That's not a judgment of competence. It's a recognition of diminishing returns. The AFC North factor. Another quiet influence on this decision was the division itself. The AFC North has become one of the league's most demanding environments. Baltimore operates with continuity. Pittsburgh maintains structural stability. Cincinnati has built a clear identity around its quarterback. Against that backdrop, Cleveland's recent stagnation felt more severe. Finishing last in the division twice in a row doesn't just affect standings. It reshapes internal timelines. Patience stops being about development and starts being about avoiding permanent separation. The offensive identity problem. For much of Stefanski's tenure, the Browns' identity was supposed to be clear. Balanced offense, efficient passing, controlled tempo. By 2025, that identity had blurred. The offense wasn't explosive, but it also wasn't reliably efficient. It wasn't young, but it wasn't settled. It wasn't rebuilding, but it wasn't producing. Organizations can tolerate losing during a rebuild. They struggle with uncertainty during a supposed competitive window.